To us.
To forever.
I love you.
At exactly 7:42 p.m., my husband raised a champagne glass to another woman. He leaned closer to her across the candlelit table, like the rest of the world had disappeared around them. The restaurant was loud with laughter and music, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding inside my chest. What he didn't know was that I had been sitting 3 meters away the entire time, hidden in the corner booth beside the window, watching every smile, every touch, every lie unfold in front of me. And the man sitting across from me, staring at them with the same hollow expression I carried on my face that night, was her husband. Neither of them had any idea we were there. Neither of them noticed the way our table remained untouched, while theirs slowly filled with empty champagne glasses and whispered promises. They thought this dinner was private. They thought they were safe. What they didn't know was that this moment had been planned carefully for weeks. Every text message, every reservation, every second leading to that dinner had brought us exactly where we were supposed to be. This wasn't an accident. This was the night their secret stopped belonging to them. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because tonight's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the terrifying moment when two people realize the person they trusted most has been living an entirely different life right in front of them. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why that dinner changed 4 lives forever. My name is Claire Morgan, and for 23 years, I believed I understood my husband better than anyone else in the world. Ethan Morgan was the kind of man people admired instantly. He had the steady confidence that made strangers trust him within minutes of meeting him. He worked as a financial consultant in downtown Chicago, wore expensive suits without trying too hard, and always knew the right thing to say in every room he walked into. To outsiders, our marriage looked stable, predictable, safe. We lived in a quiet suburb north of the city where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. Our neighbors waved at us every morning. We hosted barbecues during the summer. We celebrated anniversaries at the same steakhouse every year. From the outside, our life looked complete. But there's something people rarely talk about when it comes to long marriages. Sometimes relationships don't collapse loudly. Sometimes they fade so slowly that you barely notice the distance growing, until one day you wake up beside someone who feels like a stranger, wearing the face of the person you once loved. The changes in Ethan started small. So small, in fact, that I spent months convincing myself I was imagining them. He became protective of his phone in ways he never had before. Ethan used to leave it lying around carelessly on kitchen counters or beside the television while he showered. Suddenly, it never left his pocket. If a message came through, he'd glance at it quickly and lock the screen immediately. At first, I told myself it was work stress. His company had recently merged with another firm, and everyone there was working longer hours. But then the business trips started becoming more frequent. Dallas, New York, Denver. Sometimes he'd leave on a Thursday morning and return Saturday night, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. Expensive cologne. The kind with sharp, woody notes that linger in hotel elevators and luxury department stores. And the strangest part was that Ethan had never cared much about his appearance before. Yet suddenly he joined a gym, bought new dress shirts, started whitening his teeth. Men in their 50s don't usually reinvent themselves overnight unless they believe someone new is paying attention. I remember the exact moment my denial finally cracked. It was raining heavily outside that night, the kind of cold Chicago rain that rattles windows and makes the whole house feel isolated from the rest of the world. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch while watching television, exhausted after returning from what he claimed was another client meeting downtown. His phone vibrated against the coffee table beside me. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. After 23 years together, we never needed passwords or privacy rules. But something about the way he'd been acting lately made my stomach tighten before I even reached for it. The screen lit up with a message preview. Just one sentence. Tomorrow can't come fast enough. That was it. No name. Just a heart emoji beside a number I didn't recognize. But in that single second, everything inside me changed. Because deep down, before my mind could even process the words, my body already knew the truth. People think discovering an affair happens dramatically. They imagine screaming arguments or lipstick stains or hotel receipts falling out of pockets. But real betrayal usually arrives quietly. It enters your life through tiny moments that slowly connect together until the picture becomes impossible to ignore. After that message, I stopped asking questions out loud. Instead, I started watching, listening, remembering details I would have dismissed before. Ethan began taking phone calls outside late at night. He smiled at messages while sitting across from me at dinner. Sometimes he seemed distracted during conversations, like part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. One evening, I noticed he'd started wearing a different watch to work. It was a silver Rolex I had never seen before. When I asked where it came from, he laughed casually and said he'd bought it months ago and forgot to wear it. Ethan was many things, but careless with money wasn't one of them. He would never spend thousands of dollars without mentioning it. That's when I realized the lies were no longer occasional. They had become part of his daily routine. Over the following weeks, I learned how terrifyingly easy it is to investigate someone you've lived with for half your life. You know their habits, their routines, their tells. Ethan always used the same 4-digit PIN for everything important. The same PIN he'd used since our children were teenagers. One night after he fell asleep upstairs, I unlocked his phone and found months of messages between him and a woman named Vanessa Reed. Reading them felt like stepping into another version of my husband's life. They joked about restaurants I'd never heard of, shared hotel room numbers, complained about their spouses, complained about me. That part hurt more than anything else. Ethan described me as emotionally distant, predictable, tired. Like I was some obstacle standing between him and happiness instead of the woman who had built an entire life beside him. But the message that stayed burned into my memory came from Vanessa herself. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. When I read that line, my hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. What shocked me even more was discovering Vanessa wasn't some young assistant or random stranger Ethan met online. Vanessa Reed was 51 years old, married, a real estate agent living 40 minutes away in Naperville. She had 2 adult sons and a husband named Daniel Reed. I stared at family photos on her social media page for nearly an hour that night. Smiling Christmas pictures, beach vacations, anniversary dinners. It looked painfully familiar. Another marriage pretending to survive while something underneath it quietly collapsed. And suddenly I realized this affair wasn't reckless or temporary. This had become a second relationship, a second life running parallel to ours for almost a year. For days, I barely slept. I moved through the house like a ghost while Ethan carried on as though nothing had changed. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from sitting beside someone who has no idea you know the truth. Every conversation feels fake. Every kiss goodbye feels rehearsed. And the anger becomes overwhelming because the person betraying you still expects your kindness at the same time. But eventually, the sadness faded into something colder, clearer. I stopped crying and started planning. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon, while Ethan showered upstairs. His phone buzzed again beside me. Another message from Vanessa. Reservation confirmed for Friday, 7:30. Can't wait to finally have a full evening together. Attached underneath was the reservation confirmation for Bellamy's, one of the most expensive restaurants in downtown Chicago. A place known for private wine rooms and anniversary dinners. I stared at the reservation details for several seconds before one thought entered my mind so suddenly it almost frightened me. What if they weren't the only people at dinner that night? I stared at the reservation confirmation for nearly a minute before I finally opened my laptop and searched for Daniel Reed. Up until that moment, Vanessa had only existed as screenshots and hidden messages on Ethan's phone. But Daniel was real. A husband sitting somewhere completely unaware that his marriage was collapsing behind his back. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. His LinkedIn profile showed a man who looked older than Ethan, with tired eyes, and the kind of expression people develop after years of carrying stress quietly. He worked as an architect for a commercial design firm in Naperville and had been married to Vanessa for 26 years. 26 years. Reading that number made my chest tighten because it meant he understood the same kind of commitment I once believed Ethan and I still had. I must have typed and deleted that first message to Daniel 15 times before finally sending it. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk about our spouses. That was it. Simple, cold, direct. Then I sat there staring at my screen while my entire future seemed to hang on whether a stranger would respond. Daniel replied 37 minutes later. I remember the exact timing because I watched the clock obsessively the entire time. His message was only 6 words long. I already know about them. Reading that sentence sent a chill through me unlike anything I'd felt since discovering the affair. Somehow, the reality became even worse. Ethan and Vanessa hadn't just been lying to us. They had been living comfortably inside those lies, while both of us quietly suffered alone. Daniel and I agreed to meet the following afternoon at a small cafe halfway between our suburbs. I almost didn't go. Part of me still feared hearing the details out loud would destroy whatever fragile emotional control I had left. But the moment I saw Daniel sitting alone near the back window of that cafe, I realized he looked exactly the way I felt. Exhausted, humiliated, hollow. He didn't smile when I sat down across from him. He simply slid a manila folder across the table toward me. Inside were printed hotel receipts, photographs, timestamps, and copies of credit card charges dating back nearly a year. Daniel had been tracking the affair for months. He told me he confronted Vanessa once 6 months earlier after finding messages on her iPad, but she convinced him it had ended. She cried, promised him everything was over, swore Ethan meant nothing to her, and for a while, Daniel wanted desperately to believe her, because sometimes the truth feels too painful to survive. For almost 2 hours, we sat there comparing timelines and piecing together moments from our marriages that suddenly made terrible sense. The business trips Ethan mentioned matched weekends Vanessa claimed she was attending real estate conferences. Restaurant charges lined up perfectly with nights both of them claimed to be working late. Every detail connected neatly together, like a puzzle neither of us ever wanted completed. But somewhere during that conversation, something inside me changed. The sadness slowly gave way to clarity. Ethan and Vanessa had spent months controlling the narrative of our lives while Daniel and I quietly absorbed the damage. They lied while expecting our loyalty at the same time. They wanted the comfort of marriage and the excitement of secrecy without consequences from either world. And suddenly, I realized I no longer wanted explanations. I wanted them to face the reality they had created. That's when Daniel asked me a question I'll never forget. What happens if we stop hiding the truth for them? I looked at him for several seconds without answering because the idea terrified me. Not because it felt wrong, but because it felt powerful. For months, Ethan and Vanessa had controlled every meeting, every message, every hidden moment. They believed they were smarter than us, safer than us, untouchable. And now, for the first time, that control could disappear. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and placed the Bellamy's reservation confirmation on the table between us. Friday night, 7:30 p.m., private dining section. The exact dinner Ethan believed was another secret memory with Vanessa. Daniel leaned back slowly and said, "What if they aren't alone this time?" That single sentence became the beginning of everything. Friday night arrived colder than expected. Downtown Chicago was covered in rain, and the streets glowed gold beneath rows of traffic lights and restaurant signs reflecting off wet pavement. I remember sitting in my car outside Bellamy's, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. For several minutes, I considered driving away, because once we walked into that restaurant, there would be no returning to the life we had before. No pretending anymore, no delaying the collapse. But then Ethan's text arrived. "Client dinner, running late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at those words and felt something inside me harden permanently. Even now, minutes before meeting his mistress, he still expected my trust. That was the moment I stopped mourning my marriage. Daniel arrived 5 minutes later, wearing a charcoal overcoat darkened by rain. Neither of us spoke much while entering the restaurant. We didn't need to. The silence between us already carried the same understanding. Bellamy's looked exactly the way Ethan would have wanted for a secret affair dinner. Dim lighting, quiet jazz music, expensive wine displayed behind glass walls. The hostess led Daniel and me toward the back corner of the dining room, where our reserved table sat only a few meters away from Ethan and Vanessa's. They hadn't arrived yet. My heart pounded so hard I thought the entire restaurant could hear it. Then, at exactly 7:42 p.m., Ethan walked through the entrance wearing the navy suit I bought him for our anniversary 2 years earlier. Vanessa followed beside him in a dark red dress, smiling up at him while he placed his hand gently against her lower back. Watching that nearly broke me because it wasn't just physical betrayal anymore. It was intimacy, familiarity, comfort. Ethan looked happier in those few seconds than he had looked with me in years. Daniel noticed it too. I could see the pain in his face while Vanessa laughed at something Ethan whispered to her as they sat down. For nearly 40 minutes, we watched them together from across the room. Champagne arrived at their table first, then appetizers, then wine. Ethan reached across the table and held Vanessa's hand, while speaking softly enough that nobody else could hear. They looked completely relaxed, completely safe. At one point, Vanessa leaned forward and kissed him briefly near the corner of his mouth, while the waiter poured another glass of champagne. Daniel looked down at the table after that, and for the first time all night, I thought he might leave. Instead, he quietly pulled several folded papers from inside his jacket and placed them beside his wineglass. Hotel receipts, screenshots, printed proof, everything. Then Ethan finally noticed me. I'll never forget the expression on his face for the rest of my life. At first, he looked confused, like his brain physically couldn't process what he was seeing. His eyes shifted from me to Daniel and back again while the color slowly drained from his face. Vanessa turned seconds later and froze completely. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The restaurant noise around us suddenly felt distant, almost unreal. Daniel stood first, then I stood beside him. Together, we walked slowly toward their table while Ethan stared at me like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. "Claire," he whispered. I ignored him. Vanessa looked at Daniel, with tears already forming in her eyes. But he didn't even acknowledge her. He simply placed the folded papers in front of Ethan, beside the untouched champagne glass. Nobody at the surrounding tables spoke. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. "Don't stop dinner on our account," I said calmly. Ethan opened his mouth to explain something, but no words came out. Because there are moments in life where lies suddenly become useless. This was one of them. Vanessa began crying quietly while Daniel stepped backward away from the table. And for the first time all night, Ethan looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of losing me. Afraid of finally being seen clearly. I slowly removed my wedding ring and placed it beside his wineglass. Then, I looked directly into his eyes and said, "Now, you can stop pretending." And after 23 years of marriage, I walked away from him without looking back. The divorce became final 8 months later. Ethan tried calling me for weeks after the dinner. At first, he begged for another chance. Then he blamed stress, loneliness, alcohol, midlife confusion. Every excuse people use when they finally face consequences they never believed would arrive. But the truth was simpler than all of that. Ethan didn't destroy our marriage during that dinner at Bellamy's. He destroyed it long before that night. That dinner only exposed the damage publicly. Vanessa and Daniel separated quietly 3 months later. From what I heard, the affair ended almost immediately after the confrontation. Apparently, relationships built in secrecy rarely survive once reality enters the room. But the strangest part of this story happened nearly a year later. One morning, I received a message from Daniel. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce proceedings ended. His text contained only one sentence. "Thank you for making me see the truth before I wasted the rest of my life." I stared at that message for a long time because I finally understood something important. That night at Bellamy's wasn't really about revenge. It was about refusing to remain invisible inside someone else's lies. Sometimes people betray you long before you discover the truth. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is force the truth into the light, no matter how painful it becomes afterward. Because in the end, the affair didn't destroy our marriages. The lies did.